Hey everyone, I've decided that I'm going to recreate a card that I made some time ago and that I absolutely love. It's this one here. It's using this MFT Dynamics die set, which is called the Stitch Blooms die. It has a bunch of stitched die cuts that when they're cut can immediately decorate something. You don't need to color them in. If you use colored cardstock, you can create beautiful flowers really quickly. I know there's quite a few different companies that have something similar, so anything that would work for this card style. I will hold this up to the camera and then this color combination. One thing I did learn when making these previously is that you can stretch the die cuts by not putting them so close together. So you can notice the difference here between these two a little bit, where this is a little bit more spaced out. I think both of them do work really well, but this one uses up many more die cuts, so you need to use more paper and more runs through your die cut machine. What I'm going to do is create multiple cards and try and work out the most efficient way to do it. If you're doing this type of layout, it's really important to have the die cuts come off the edge and then trim them. If you place everything perfectly onto the card, the look is just nowhere near as good. The intent here is to try and make the cards quite quickly without having to fiddle with the bits that fall off the edge. So what I thought I would do is, most of my cardstock is letter size from the US, even though I am based in Australia. This one here was an A4 and I've trimmed it down to 10.5 inches by 8 inches across. This means that I can cut 4 panels at the front and have them with that small border around it. So this is, my attempted hack at doing multiple cards at once. This represents a full pass through of the yellow, white, blue, and then navy. And what I've been experimenting with is, if I do one pass through of 4 colors, do I get 4 cards? I ran each color through my die cutting machine 4 times, and I basically get 1 card per page. Then I'm going to end up with 16 cards in the end, which feels like a really good haul. For this first panel, I had already laid out all of the flowers and all of the leaves and branches, which meant it was simply a matter of systematically working my way throughout the panel and attaching each of them to the silver paper. This was really quite a straightforward process. I did learn a few things along the way though, and that is with those branches where I've got the little bit of the stalk hanging off the edge, it was very difficult to use that later. So if I flipped that around and had part of a leaf hanging off the edge to be trimmed, it meant that that leaf could then be used on one of the individual cards. So when I did the further panels, I did make sure that I had all of those stems facing inwards just to make things a little bit easier. I also added all of the little circles to the flowers before I actually created the other panels, which meant that I added the elements directly to the silver, building up from the biggest elements to the smallest. And that was a lot easier than trying to figure out all of the elements that I had placed on top of the paper, which ones had I glued and which ones had not. And so when I worked through here, a couple of times I had to pick up the paper and shake it a bit just to see which ones I'd already added and which ones still needed the liquid glue. You'll notice on the left-hand side on the grey panel of paper that there's actually the individual leaves, and those are sitting there waiting for later in the process. I did not attach any of those until I had cut the panel down into the 4 individual card fronts, because then it became a little bit clearer as to what each card itself would look like and where it needed either some elements hanging off the edge of the panel, or whether there was some gaps within the panel itself that needed a leaf to just fill in some of the grey space. There's a couple more elements to add here, and then this stage for the 4 card panels is completed. For the next stage, I needed to actually cut this down into the 4 individual panels, and it was a little bit nerve-wracking doing this initially. I wasn't really sure how to approach it because I had elements sticking off each side, so I couldn't line it up at the very bottom of my panel. I had to float it in the middle and line it up to chop it down. On the right-hand side, you can see all the little spare elements dropping off to the edge. These can be used to add a little bit more interest to the rest of the card panels once I've chopped it down to the 4 individual pieces. Okay, I've already added some extra elements to the 3 panels at the top of the screen, and I'm now finishing off the 4th one. It's a matter of grabbing some liquid glue and determining what color I need to balance things out, and then adding those little small bits that got trimmed off previously around the edges, it just means that the panel really looks like it was cut down from something bigger, and it gives a lot more interest to the card itself. I also, through this stage, have added the individual leaves to the card front, and that means that the little pile of them on the left-hand side gives me a color choice. So if I need to add some more navy, or I think that spot would be better with the teal or the white, then I do have some options as to what to add to make the best of the card front. This was a really fun part of the process for me. I really enjoyed adding the little elements and figuring out which components would make the card have a really great balanced look. Adding the panels to an A2 white card base, so these are standard 5.5 by 4.25 in size. Just running through and adding all 4 of them. You can then see when I put them all together how they all match and how they came from one larger panel, and they've been chopped up to create 4 quite different looking but still similar cards. I'm now using the edge of my panels that I used to cut out the original die cuts to create some mats for my sentiments. I had several sentiments ready to go that were already coincidentally matted in navy, but I didn't have 16 of them, I only had 8. So I'm now creating another 8. Whenever I line up my die cuts on a panel of cardstock, I always push it right to the edge because these strips are always super helpful in creating extra elements on the card, and given that they already match the color combination that I'm using, they work out perfectly. I'm just using some liquid glue, adding it onto these small strips of paper, and then I just trim them down with my trimmer, and then they are ready to add to these cards. So teal and navy and yellow and white is a color combination that I don't think I've used in a while, but I definitely love blues and I really love summer colors for card combinations. I often get my ideas from Pinterest. Do you have a favorite color combination that is your go-to, and where do you get your inspiration from? It'd be great if you could share it in the comments down below. I'm really keen to really branch out and use other color combinations. Apologies for this clip here, I'm right down off the bottom of my screen, but I'm literally using my trimmer just to snip out the edges of these sentiments so that I can then attach them to the front of the cards. I've offset them just down the bottom right hand side. This is similar to the sample card that I had created some time ago, and it's a really straightforward process. I'm going to repeat this to create more cards with the rest of the die cuts you can see on the left hand side. Let's see how I go. I have managed to create 16 cards using a different color combination than my previous card, and I'm really happy with how these turned out. I've put a link here to another video that I think you might enjoy. Have a great day.